Hi, and welcome to another edition of Lore Maker's Guide to the Galaxy. I'm your host for today, senior writer Will Weisbaum. And if this is your first time turning into Lore Maker's Guide, welcome. And basically, what we do here is various members of the narrative team gather together and we take you through the ins and outs of some of our many solar systems spread throughout the Star Citizen verse. So today we're going to be taking a look at the Redder system, which is one of my personal favorites, probably ranked 32 on my list. It is focused on education, which is just awesome. So let's take a look over there right now. So we're gonna hop into our handy search bar. Oh, there it is, star system. Let's click on go. Ooh, very pretty. So this actually might look familiar to the last system we're in because Redder has a similar Class G main sequence star just like we have here in Sol. It's yellowish white. It's got a solar mass of 1.05, so very close, a solar radius of 1.01, very close to our sun. And it is about 6,000 kelvins, which is hot. Just in general, I don't know how that ranks against other suns, but in terms of things you don't want to touch, it's pretty high up there. So let's get into a little bit of the backstory of this system. It is both one of the oldest and youngest systems in the UE, and the reason why we like saying that is because its population is one of the youngest in the entire empire because of how many universities are located within it. It has a very young demographic, which leads to all sorts of fun outcomes that we'll talk about a little bit later. The reason why it's one of the oldest is because it was discovered way back in 2287. So for those of you who may not know, our current year in the universe is 2946. So 2287 was quite a while ago. Redder was discovered by two ambitious PhD students who were attending the Martian Institute of Space and Technology, and they were out there doing some trial runs when they noticed some weird information coming in on one of their scan drones, and they decided to take a look, and lo and behold, they discovered a brand new system. So they rushed back to school to let one of their professors and the head of the school know what they found. The person they told was Adrian Zemlach. And now Adrian had very strong political views. She was a former politician herself, and she was really kind of dismayed by the way that Croshaw had turned out. Recently it had just been developed and the terraforming was just completed. And she saw this brand new space being divvied up by all these various corporations and political entities, and she felt that the people were getting lost in the equation. So she had the idea that this newfound system, that they could do some good with it. So they sort of pretty much held the information, the coordinates of this jump point, ransom until the powers that be agreed to set aside a large portion of the system for the public use, namely educational resources. And that's what ended up happening, and it's been really one of the bastions of the empire in terms of knowledge and learning and higher understanding. The name of the system, Redder, comes from the word for master and teacher, and it was Zemlach's own nickname. You might be familiar with the same base word being used in the word rhetoric. So there you go. It's always useful to remember that words have the power to shape worlds. It's beautiful. So now that we've talked about the star and the system overall, how about we take a zoom in here to take a look at Redder 1. Now, Redder 1 is unpopulated. It is a small, unterraformed, rocky world that rapidly rotates the star. Now, it is a mesoplanet. which is a planet that's small enough to classify as a dwarf planet, but which has cleared the neighborhood of all other materials and what's not. So like a lot of dwarf planets will have smaller fragments around showing material that hasn't been gathered up. But Redder is a mesoplanet because it has cleared its orbit of other things. Interesting enough, that classification was suggested by Isaac Asimov back in the 1980s. So, thanks. Now, moving on from there, we start getting in through Redder 2 through 4, which are all rocky planets about the same size and mass as Earth, which is pretty fun and makes them all good for terraforming and living in. We'll hop on over to Redder 2, also commonly known as Persei. Ooh, look at it, very pretty. So this is a terrestrial rocky planet. It was terraformed, and it has a medium population, very much made up by the students attending school there. And this was really the planet that kicked off Redder because it had such a dense amount of really valuable resources and minerals on its surface that when they started developing the system, this brought money into Redder, was all the companies vying to collect these resources. But once those pretty much dried up, it was the universities that allowed Redder to continue to thrive over the centuries. So there's a bunch of schools and think tanks on this world. Probably the most well-known one is the University of Persei Analytical Research and Quantification Center, known as UPark, that really pushes the scientific boundaries of technology in the universe. And a lot of it is very classified, a lot of government work, and stuff like energy efficient quantum drives and improved thermal resistant spacesuit fabric and all kind of really cool out there tech pushing the boundaries. And due to the sensitive nature of some of their work, access to the planet can be a little more restricted than some of the other worlds. You have to they take a closer look at who's hopping on down because of the sensitive material being done there, worked on there. So that is Persei. Let's pop back out. Next up we have Race, which is how I personally like to pronounce that. I say to each of you out there, find your own way, chart your own path, and say it differently. It is a terrestrial rocky planet, and it is represented in the UEE, just like Persei was, with 2 representatives though. And again, this planet is just jam-packed with universities and schools, but it is a little bit more of a party planet than the other planets in the system. You know, there's a good amount of ancillary items that you would expect to find in a university world, such as a good selection of bars and dance clubs. And basically anything and everything you'd want to learn about, you could find someone on the planet studying, which is quite exciting. They also, owing to the planet, overall, Redder is considered to have more comm traffic than pretty much any other system, even sometimes outranking Sol itself for just the sheer amount of volume of information that they're shuttling back and forth amongst the planets and through drones that go through the jump points. It's also, because of this youth population, they're always on the cutting edge of what's cool and hip and fashionable, as well as typically that goes along with the counterculture. It's a very political world, and typically there have been a lot of anti-established movements have found their origins on the world. During the Messer era, there was a lot of focus put on how to stifle the students who were protesting the Messer's regime. They would try to plant operatives onto the world to find dissidents, as well as to do kind of their own rhetoric to counter against them. One such example is Sidney Carmack was a researcher in Redder who plowed through in 2806 when the UEE released a bunch of documentation thanks to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and she was able to plow through the records and kind of started to point that the attack on Jada, which many attribute to being the kind of boiling point that tipped Messer into the position of imperator in the first place, this research was able to go back through these historical documents and pinpoint that maybe something funny was going on, and released a whole book on it that people are still debating about what really happened there. So a lot of interesting thoughts originating on this beautiful party world. Moving on now to Mentor, another university world. This one is significantly cooler as it's farther out in the habitable zone. It's got a lower population and less schools. A lot of the students here are have a reputation for being more studious than on Reese per se, because it's very cold, there's less to do outside, so they kind of knuckle down and study. One of the bigger schools here is the Scaliger School of Medicine is located on Mentor, and one of the famous alumni from here are the people who founded Bioticorp back in the day. The founders of it, Ted Santos and Dio Nicholas, first met at the School of Medicine. The Redder Journal of Medicine is also published out of Mentor. On the surface is also this UE seed vault, which is a secure location that houses as many plant seeds as they can, and they're stored in the cold environment there. There is a heightened military presence guarding that seed vault to make sure that nothing happens to it, but they usually keep their distance away from the other schools. Now we move on to the last planet in the system, Redder 5, which is located in the system, way back out, well out of the habitable zone. And Redder 5 is a gas giant, and it's a massive, colorful swirl, and some kind of compare it to a hallucinogenic display. So there are those students who recommend, doing a little bit of color and floating out here and just seeing what thoughts pop in your head. I don't recommend that. But if you're into that sort of thing, very fun area to go check out. It's a prismatic gas giant. We're not sure what makes it prismatic. It could be a complex interaction between Rayleigh scattering and molecular composition. And usually it's considered such a beautiful site that there haven't really allowed many harvesters to come in there and collect gas. It's almost a national park. There are several jump points in the system. There's a jump point to Croshaw, there's another one to Cathcart, there's one to Fora, as well as one to Idris. That keeps the system pretty well connected with the rest of the UE. There's probably some interesting traffic that moves between Cathcart and Redder. Kind of those many dissidents from the university system drop out and maybe head that way, who are unsatisfied with the political climate in the UE. And that's about it for the system. My last interesting fact would probably be that the Redder Raiders haven't won a Saddle championship since 29-16. So here's hoping that maybe they can turn it around this year. So yeah, that's it. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in to learn a little bit more about the Redder system. And I hope you enjoyed this edition of Lore Maker's Guide to the Galaxy. Thanks.